Hello, lovely, and welcome to the Essence of Expression podcast. Get ready to explore insights, lessons, practices, and wisdom from life for life. I'm your host, Arejay, healer, teacher, student, and sage. I'm excited and honored to have you with me on this journey. Let's dive in. Happy full moon in Sagittarius, guys and gals. I've been thinking a lot about stories recently. And I wanted us to take the time today to ask ourselves, what stories are we telling ourselves? And to ask whether they are supporting us in moving toward our goals or limiting us and restricting us away from the things we desire. And I ask that because stories are an interesting thing, right? Like, we remember them, I think it's something like 22 times better than just facts. And the power of a story isn't dependent upon its truth. So we can have really impactful stories that we carry with us and that we repeat over and over. And every time we repeat it, we're going to remember it even more. That may not be accurate. And it's still driving our behavior and our perspective. But it could be complete bullshit and absolutely wrong. And we get to decide whether we want to continue telling the stories that we're telling, or if we want to rewrite the whole fucking script. And I really want you guys to play with this idea, because when something comes to mind and you say it to yourself, I want you to start to ask, where'd that story come from? Like, what if it's just a story? What if there's no truth in it at all? Or what if it's the greatest truth ever, right? Depending upon what the story is and whether it's limiting or supporting you. But if it's limiting you, I really want you to ask, like, where'd this story come from? And what if this story is bullshit? What might the true story be? And give yourself time to actually ponder about the real story, right? Ponder about the opposite of what that limiting story is. What does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? How does it move in you? And if you find that revised story to be more empowering, to be more motivating, right? To be something that you can use to fuel your growth, to fuel obtaining your goals, your dreams, your wishes, and your desires, why not start to use that? And as we look at the stories that we let live on repeat in our heads, really see if there are any themes that you can latch onto. Are there any patterns that you can see on where it's easier for you to tell empowering stories and where it's easier for you to tell yourself limiting stories? And then take a look at how those areas of your life, how they're going. How's it working out for you? How are those stories impacting and shaping your reality? And do you like it that way? Do you like it that way? And if you don't, then start to ask yourself, like, what other stories might I tell? What is the impact? What's the actual result that I want to see? And then work yourself backwards from that to the story that gets you there, right? So if you imagine that your ideal outcome is the end of that story, what got your character, backtrack that, what got your character to that destination? Where did your character start out? And then what would happen if you just ran that story on a loop? If you let yourself believe that. And it's funny where we can get our stories from, because sometimes they're handed down to us. Sometimes it's in experience. And the ones that are experiential, I would invite you to question maybe even a little more if you've never questioned them before. Because sometimes what happens, right? We will have the thing that happened, but our brains will interpret that to mean something. It'll give it a value. It'll give it a judgment. And sometimes that judgment, that meaning that we assign to it, is inaccurate, right? Because our perspective was limited at that time. And sometimes, especially this happens when we're really young, it's very easy to interpret a situation a certain way and assign meaning to it that wasn't, and get this nugget, this rule, this belief that was not the intended share. It was not what was trying to be planted. It wasn't really what the experience was meant to give us, or the insight that was being shared, and we just kind of took it away wrong, right? And that's nobody's fault. It happens, right? We misunderstand. We do the best we can from the perspective we have with the limitations around it, and that's all we can do. And sometimes we forget to go back when we have a bigger perspective, when we have more knowledge, when we have more understanding, and reconsider it from that wiser, broadened perspective. So take a moment and go back through those, right? And this is some work that'll take some time, and it's absolutely worth it, I promise. But you'll start to see some of these stories, and you'll start to be able to unravel them. And they may look different for everybody. I know at one point in time, I definitely had the I'm an empath, so I absorb everyone's emotions story, which, by the way, is bullshit. Not because that isn't an ability of an empath, it is, but that is not you are not condemned to that. You do not have to do that. That's just what happens when you haven't figured out how to work with that particular gift, right? But I think one of my favorite stories that I used to have, and I don't even remember, I don't fully remember how I got it. And I just know from a fairly young age, probably 9 or 10 is when it started to form. But it was around me and my birthday, right? For a very long time, I hated my birthday. And I hated it because I would look around, and a lot of the people I cared about would be struggling, major issues would be happening, just lots of pain and sadness. And at some point in my little young mind, bless my little heart, I associated that with myself. I thought I was the cause of it, right? That I would bring this pain and this suffering. And for a very long time, I tried to figure out what it was about me that was so bad, right? Like I know at one point in time, I tried to figure out like what had I done wrong in a previous life that was so messed up that this is what I carry. This pain and this suffering is what I bring. And so naturally, like I hated my birthday because it was just a lot of people, like the people I cared about weren't usually happy. They were usually going through stuff and it was sad, or they were upset or whatever, any number of things. And it wasn't until, I don't know, I think somewhere around like 19 or maybe 20, somewhere early or late teens, early 20s, somewhere in there, that I remember like crying about this and just really stuck, unable to figure out like what the fuck was so wrong and bad about me. And it was really funny because in the middle of like this meltdown that I was having, like I heard this laughter that started, right? And then the next thing I heard was my child. The darkness is not here because of you. You are here because of it. You are my response. And in that moment, something shifted, right? And it would unfold and become clearer like over the years, but that was enough to shift the perspective, because I had to pause and think like, what if I had gotten that story wrong? What if I had gotten the order incorrect? What if it wasn't I arrived and then pain and darkness and suffering, but what if it was pain and darkness and suffering had been there and then I arrived to help it go away, right? To help be the opposite that counters that. And it's been interesting, right? Like I don't necessarily sit and ponder on it super hardcore, but I also don't hate my birthday anymore. I actually really like my birthday. And the more I've gone along on this journey of like personal growth and healing and coming back home to myself and returning to my gifts, like that's kind of valid, right? I'm not the thing that brings that. I'm an answer, and I'm one of many paths that help people grow beyond that help people spin their pain into their gold and into their wisdom and then go to help others, right? I am part of a different ripple that is the countermeasure, right? And it's by no means just me. There are a lot of us here. And there's always a choice of which way we're going to perceive things, what we're going to allow things to mean, and how we're going to allow that to drive our behaviors moving forward. So, what story has just been kind of chilling in your brain that resurfaces because it loves to visit you, that would mean something completely different if in fact it weren't the truth, and if in fact there was a different story, a different version that you hadn't heard? Thank you for your time and attention. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show. If someone came to mind while you were listening to this episode, please take a moment to share it with them. If you're interested in joining a community and diving further into these topics, please visit theessenceofexpression.com/community and request to join our community group. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night or day, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.